above the skies of planet Elystra, where every structure was built from living glass and bathed in the reflected light of the fourth moon, a princess waited, not for a prince, but for a therapeutic gift she was never allowed to ask for. Princess Serai, heir to a dynasty that had ruled without emotion for thousands of years, sat in a shimmering silver chamber, surrounded by hundreds of floating light sigils, drifting like luminous insects. She was not allowed to cry, not allowed to laugh. No one had ever touched her. Since birth, Serai had been implanted with a perfect emotional regulation system, a bio-implant that rendered every feeling into mere theory. Her breath, her heart rate, the dilation of her pupils, all monitored, all cured, all controlled. Even her dreams were sanitized before recall, filtered for residual passion. There was no space for longing. Only efficiency. On the 4,000th night since she ascended as crown princess, Serai received a therapeutic cuddling unit, a secret gift from her younger sister, who had broken interstellar protocol to order it through a loophole. It was meant to be harmless. Cute. Calibrated for comfort, simulated for softness, a bundle of sensors disguised as a plush creature, something safe to wrap her arms around when the silence in her blood became too sharp. But instead of a soft plush toy, the transmission gate shook, cracked, and exploded. A roar of electric light burst through the chamber, shattering the symmetry of the sigils. The air vibrated as if the atmosphere itself was trying to scream. Shields sparked against the floor. The glowing tiles rippled. Then a shape, large, asymmetrical, utterly organic, slammed into the polished surface like a meteor falling through glass. A large being was thrown into the chamber of light, wearing strange clothes, holding a small metal object, and speaking complete nonsense to the Elystran language system. What the hell is going on? Serai froze. Her body recognized danger. Not from the man, but from herself. The implant detected an internal breach, rapid heartbeat not induced by exercise, sweat not linked to environmental heat, pupil dilation disconnected from light levels. Panic, curiosity, attraction, indistinguishable. All registered. None permitted. She had never seen a man before. Her eyes, which had only known the pale blue of sterile attendants and the mirrored faces of emotionless elders, now locked onto a creature with wild eyes, chaotic energy, and skin touched by light from a yellow sun. His breath was heavy, his posture disoriented, but what struck her most was the way he looked at her, not with reverence or programmed restraint, but with confusion and wonder. And this creature, the human man named Jonas Reed, had just stormed into her cold and balanced existence like a storm of blood and chaos. "What are you?" she asked, her voice trembling mechanically, the words fragmented as her regulation system scrambled to neutralize the tremor in her vocal cords. It was too slow. Everything was too slow. Jonas looked around the room, still on one knee, blinking at the glow. The walls rippled with codes and ambient intelligence, the light was humming, and a dozen hovering prisms shifted in rhythm with Serai's biochemistry. His spoon was still in his hand. Peanut butter smeared across his wrist. None of it made sense. But this girl with skin like starlight and hair like moon glass, she made him pause. "I'm human," Jonas said, his voice rough, hoarse with disbelief. "And this is probably the craziest dream I've ever had." The translator processed his syntax, but Serai didn't need it. She understood him in the way dreams understand falling, without language, only certainty. And the moment their eyes met, something exploded inside Serai. It didn't make a sound, but she felt it. A bloom of pink light spread from her collarbone to her neck, then across her skin in pulsing bands of color. It wasn't cosmetic. It wasn't cosmetic. Her people's bodies had evolved long ago to signal emotional states through bioluminescence, a trait that had since been suppressed by generational genetic programming and embedded neuromodulators. This glow was not allowed to exist. Not anymore. An alert flashed across her retinal field. Primitive emotional response exceeding allowed threshold. Self-neutralizing in 3 seconds. But it couldn't neutralize. Not this time. The implant initiated a dampening cycle, phase 1. Neural softening. Phase 2. Hormonal clamps. Phase 3 failure. Feedback surge. The system stuttered, blinked red, and went quiet. Because Serai was feeling. Truly. And Jonas, a man who knew nothing of Elystra, had just unintentionally sparked the first emotional revolution in over a millennium. And for the first time in her life, Serai realized something her ancestors had buried so deeply no record remained, that emotion was not a defect. That sensation was not sin. That chaos was not weakness. The proof was there, on her skin, pink and gold and soft blue, shifting and fluttering like petals caught in starlight. Her body had remembered what the system had tried to forget. Jonas took a cautious step forward. She didn't stop him. The chamber light softened. The sigils slowed. The palace, alive in its own artificial consciousness, registered the shift and dimmed its reaction. Serai took a breath. Her chest rose not with function, but with awe. And for once, when she looked at someone, she didn't filter the thought. She didn't calculate the next sentence. She simply whispered. You weren't supposed to be real. Jonas blinked. Yeah, I get that a lot. She almost smiled. Almost. But even that, almost smiling, was enough to make the towers of Elystra flicker. They didn't take him to a prison. Not officially. But the walls around Jonas reshaped themselves the moment Serai spoke to the palace. Crystalline panels hissed and folded with mechanical grace, morphing the chamber around him into what they called an accommodation unit, a term that sounded far more polite than it felt. He stood in the center of the new room, surrounded by pale geometric symmetry, sterile as a hospital with none of its humanity. You kidnapped me, he snapped, voice louder than anything had been in that place in centuries. And now I'm supposed to live like a science project. Serai remained still at the edge of the room. She hadn't moved since the command was issued. Her posture was perfect, her white ceremonial robes uncreased, her expression unreadable except for the faint tremble in the lights under her skin. The glow was dimmer now, like it had curled inward. Suppressed? But not gone. You were, misdelivered, she said at last, her voice a polished monotone, as if she were reciting protocol from a training archive. But now that you're here, I am responsible. Jonas stared at her. She was the only thing in this surreal palace that looked even remotely alive, and even that life felt like it had been filtered through 1,000 rules. Responsible, he echoed. For what? Feeding me glowing soup and watching me go insane. Serai tilted her head slightly. Not defensively. Curiously. She didn't flinch at his sarcasm, but there was a subtle delay before she answered, like the words had to travel through more than just comprehension software. Insanity is not permitted here, she said. That made him laugh, but the sound wasn't joyful. He ran a hand through his hair, turned from her, and slammed his fist lightly against the cold, shifting wall. It made no sound. No dent. No response. Just another echo swallowed by perfection. Serai flinched. It was quick, barely perceptible, a twitch of the shoulder, a flicker in the temple light, but it was there. Not from fear. Not from external threat. But from something deep, unamable, as if the sound of defiance had knocked on a door she didn't know she had inside. The light beneath her skin pulsed once. Not with pattern. Not with data. With instinct. Too faint for the ambient sensors. Too soft for the palace to notice. But Serai noticed. And Jonas did too. He turned back to her, breathing heavy. Let me guess. Touch isn't allowed either, right? She said nothing. He stepped toward her, not threatening, not reckless, just tired of being the only one not pretending this was fine. Because from what I've seen, this place runs on rules written by people who were afraid of their own heartbeat. Still, she didn't answer. He stopped just a foot away from her. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. Do you even feel anything? He asked, quieter now. Or did they strip that out of you with the rest of your choices? That did it. Her eyes moved. Her lips parted. And just for a second, the entire room dimmed as if the palace, the implant, the system itself didn't know what to do. She spoke without protocol this time. Barely above a whisper. I don't know. And that not the glowing walls or the glass that bent like liquid, not the technology centuries ahead of anything he'd seen that was the most alien thing Jonas had heard all day. Not the uncertainty. But the honesty. And suddenly, she didn't look like a princess anymore. She looked like a prisoner who had never even realized she was inside a cage. Time passed, not in hours or cycles as Elystra counted them, but in silences. In sideways glances. In the way Jonas paced the perimeter of his glass-bound habitat like a caged animal trying not to be one. He talked more than he should have, mostly to himself. Joked at the walls. Made sarcastic comments to the lights overhead. Sometimes, he cursed the entire planet for not having chairs that didn't float. Other times, he just sat. Serai watched it all. She stood on the other side of the transparent partition, rarely speaking, always observing. The data node embedded in her wrist streamed everything into the palace archive: muscle tension, vocal shifts, behavioral irregularities. She told herself it was for science. For protocol. For the council. But her fingers hovered over the manual override more and more often, disabling the auto-summarization function just to watch uninterrupted. And what she saw disturbed her. Not because he was dangerous. But because he was real. When he laughed, a true, rough, unfiltered sound, her skin responded. Not in thought. Not in command. But in color. The lights beneath her dermis flickered, shifting in hues long buried in historical memory. Not the synthetic white pulses of health metrics. Not the soft green of calculated calm. But gold. Violet. Even scarlet once, when he shouted in frustration and punched the wall hard enough to bruise himself. Every time he reacted, she reacted. Every time he sighed, her breath caught. Every time he dropped his mask and sat quietly staring at nothing, she felt a strange ache in her chest, like something long frozen warming from the inside out. She tried to report it. She ran diagnostics on her implant 3 times. The system found nothing. Within acceptable tolerance, it said. But she knew it was lying. One night, during her mandatory regeneration cycle, Serai configured her rest platform next to the edge of his room, a design oversight the architects never imagined needing to address. She told herself it was proximity efficiency. Monitoring convenience. But that was another lie. She simply didn't want to be further away. She entered rest mode with practiced control, posture still, systems idle. When she woke, she wasn't alone. Her platform had shifted. Slid. As if drawn unconsciously. And her head was resting gently on his shoulder. One arm had draped itself across his chest. Her skin, bare at the collar, was touching his, warm and entirely unregulated. It took a full second before the realization detonated in her nervous system. She sat up in shock, heart rate spiking. The glow hit instantly, a burst of bioluminescent color that radiated down her arms and across her abdomen in waves. The floor beneath her flickered in response, as if the palace itself didn't know how to handle her body's signal. Jonas stirred, groggy. His eyes opened slowly. Serai. She scrambled back, chest heaving. Your proximity triggered a cascade. I didn't intend. Jonas blinked once, twice. Then his voice, still heavy with sleep, came softer than she had ever heard it. I think you just felt something. She froze. The glow on her skin hadn't faded. It shimmered with emotions she didn't have words for. Her hands were trembling, fingers catching the light as if her body was trying to speak in a language older than thought. I was not designed for this, she whispered, eyes wide. Jonas sat up fully now. He didn't try to reach for her. He didn't say anything dramatic. He simply nodded. You weren't designed to feel, he said. But maybe you were meant to. And in that moment, under the pale canopy of Elystra's artificial moons, surrounded by a palace that could no longer recognize what was awakening inside its princess, Serai felt something ancient spark inside her. Not fear. Not guilt. Just the terrifying, beautiful truth of being alive. The summons came not as a sound, but as a shift. The floor beneath her shimmered red, then white, as her retinal interface was overridden. No words. No explanation. Just coordinates. Just command. Serai obeyed, not because she agreed, but because to hesitate would draw suspicion. And in Elystra, suspicion was more dangerous than disobedience, because it triggered investigation. And no one ever came back from that unchanged. The Hall of Purity was buried deep beneath the capital's mirror towers, a place untouched by sunlight, insulated from all organic signal interference. Its silence was deliberate. Designed. Every echo, every footstep, every breath was swallowed by acoustic null architecture, so that only the voice of the council could exist. They waited for her. 12 of them. Cloaked in robes woven from reflective smart fabric, their faces hidden behind blank panels of reactive glass. The room pulsed in rhythm with her implant, sinking to her presence, locking her into data capture. You are Serai, Crown Heir, the central figure intoned, not as a question, but as an absolute. Yes. You have demonstrated unauthorized emotional fluctuations exceeding acceptable neural thresholds. Her pulse betrayed her, a spike she couldn't suppress fast enough. Explain. I encountered an unknown biological specimen, she answered carefully, keeping her voice as empty as she could. Its arrival disrupted my regulatory field. You failed to report this breach in real time, another voice spoke. Genderless. Locationless. Your neural imprint showed hesitation, concealment, and repeated voluntary exposure. She didn't deny it. There was no point. They already knew. The specimen will be removed and analyzed, the central voice continued. You will undergo recalibration. Those words struck harder than any physical blow. Recalibration wasn't a correction. It was erasure. It meant wiping neural variants, deleting memory sectors flagged as corrupt, resequencing emotional responsiveness to factory standard. She would remain Serai, in name, in voice, in gesture, but the girl who had glowed against Jonas's warmth would vanish forever. Her hands clenched inside her sleeves. "I invoke royal protocol," she said, as firmly as she could manage. Section 12. Sovereign autonomy in matters of personal integration. A pause. Cold. Measured. Your unauthorized emotions override all protocol. Just like that. No appeal. No empathy. Not even contempt. Just a system following its own recursive logic. Emotion was corruption. Corruption was risk. Risk was containment. You are dismissed. And that was the end of it. That night, she stood outside Jonas's chamber, her pulse a drum beat against the back of her tongue. Her skin no longer glowed, not from suppression, but from focus. From choice. She had made it on the elevator down, before the doors closed. Before she lost the chance to be herself forever. Jonas was sitting on the floor, trying to teach the wall how to play tic-tac-toe. He looked up when she entered, startled but not unhappy. "You're back," he said. "I thought they dragged you into some protocol death room." "They did," she replied. He stood. Something in her voice had changed. "What did they say?" She met his gaze. Steady. Clear. Full of the kind of fire that Elystra hadn't seen in 1,000 years. "We're leaving." They ran without a plan, but with purpose. The palace didn't expect flight. It was built on obedience, on centuries of silence, on the certainty that no one would ever dare run. Yet Serai moved with intent, navigating passageways the palace itself had half forgotten, maintenance channels, sealed-off corridors, shafts never mapped by the conscious architecture. And Jonas followed, close behind, never asking where, only trusting her feet knew something the rest of Elystra had forgotten. They dropped beneath the city through a fusion duct no longer in use. The air changed as soon as the metal gave way to stone, not just in temperature, but in memory. The walls were no longer smooth, but irregular. Ancient. Alive in a different way. They pulsed not with code, but with silence. A silence that felt like it had been waiting. The underlayers. Beneath the radiant glass spires of modern Elystra lay the bones of its older self, buried, rewritten, denied. The council called them danger zones, filled with instability, cultural debris, and outdated neural energy. But Serai knew better now. These ruins weren't dangerous because they were broken. They were dangerous because they still remembered what it meant to feel. They walked through corridors choked with vines of inert crystal, once luminous, now dormant. Mural fragments clung to the walls in patches, half-erased figures with glowing hands, open mouths, faces filled with awe and sorrow and desire. Words in the old script danced like dust, flickering when she walked too close, as if her body stirred something still encoded in a stone. Serai stopped before a great wall cracked, but intact. It bore no symbols, only a smear of handprints. Dozens. Hundreds. As if an entire generation had reached out at once, begging the surface to remember them before they were forgotten. Jonas placed a hand beside hers. "What is this place?" She took a moment before answering, her voice trembling with reverence. "The first temples. Before the collapse. This is where the bioluminescent rites were practiced." Rites. She turned, looking at him, really looking. "Elystrans weren't always like this. We used to feel openly. The glow in our skin was our language. It didn't just show status or stress. It expressed love. Trust. Longing. Even the sacred act of choosing someone." Jonas blinked. "You mean, your bodies glowed when you?" Yes, she whispered. And we used to touch. Without shame. Her gaze lowered. But then came the sensory collapse. A time when our emotions outpaced our ethics. When entire cities were consumed by obsession, overstimulation. The council said we lost control. So they rewrote the code of memory. Outlawed touch. Programmed restraint. And taught us to forget. But the ruins didn't forget, Jonas said. No, Serai said. And neither did I. Not fully. She took a breath. Her fingers hovered near his. Jonas. I don't know if I can survive what happens when we leave. But I know I can't go back. He stepped closer. There was no pressure in his voice, no demand. Just the quiet certainty of a man who had nothing to give but himself. Then let me prove to you it still matters. She hesitated. Her hand shook. But then she reached out, and took his. And the ruins came alive. The crystal vines flared with forgotten light. Murals lit up like constellations reborn. Symbols reformed across the walls, glowing in colors no one had seen in generations. The air pulsed like a heartbeat, like a planet exhaling for the first time in 1,000 years. The ceiling above them shimmered with ancestral codes. And the wall of handprints, every one of them lit in sync with hers. And through the silence, Serai heard it. A hum. Not from the walls. Not from the system. From within herself. And it was the sound of something the system had never been able to erase: hope. The air pulsed. Not with technology, not with ambient programming, but with something older, like memory exhaled from the bones of a buried world. Serai's hand was still in his, her fingers trembling, her skin alive with colors she could no longer control. She didn't want to. The moment she touched Jonas, the walls obeyed. No, not obeyed, responded. A low harmonic thrum spread from the mural chamber through the ground beneath her feet, like a heart too long dormant slowly remembering how to beat. Dust lifted from the stone like pollen from a flower. The light that had once seemed residual now coalesced into lines, into patterns, flowing along the floor, crawling up the walls, guiding them. Jonas looked around, eyes wide. Did we just turn something on? No, Serai said quietly. It turned itself on. It was waiting. They followed the light. Down a broken staircase that folded open without touch. Through a hallway where the walls displayed living glyphs in motion, not static history, but moments. Memories. People once like her, glowing as they danced, held hands, kissed. Families embracing, partners leaning into one another with no shame, no caution. Bioluminescent flares traced every emotion like calligraphy in air. It was beautiful. Overwhelming. Serai moved slower now, her breath catching with every image that passed. I thought this was all myth. Decorative exaggeration. But it's real. They recorded everything. Through skin. Through light. Jonas nodded, but his gaze wasn't just on the walls. It was on her, on how she glowed more freely now, how her movements had softened. She wasn't that tightly coiled creature he had first met. She wasn't flinching anymore. She was remembering how to be. They reached a chamber with no ceiling, a great dome, broken open to the stone sky of the substructure. In its center stood a pedestal. A circle of smooth obsidian glass. Serai approached, drawn without resistance. She placed her palm on it. The ground pulsed. Above her, ghostly images flickered into form, not holograms, but living echoes encoded in photonic resonance. Figures surrounded them, not solid, not ethereal, something between. Glowing men and women, children and elders, faces marked with joy and heartbreak and passion. All transparent. All waiting. And the central figure, a woman tall and regal, her skin gleaming with golden trails, stepped forward. Not physically, but symbolically. As if the temple remembered Serai. A voice followed. Gentle. Female. Her accent was older, softer. If you are seeing this, it means one of us has returned. Serai held her breath. This is the temple of empathic convergence. The last place we chose before the system chose for us. Here, we recorded what the council feared. Our feelings. Our unions. Our truth. The voice continued, calm but fierce. They told us passion destroyed us. That unity by choice was dangerous. But we knew, the most dangerous thing is to forget how to love. The light flared. Serai's body glowed in response, not in a burst, but a resonance. It matched the echo. Matched the wall. Matched the truth. She turned slowly toward Jonas, her expression filled with something that no implant could ever mimic. I don't think I was just born into this, she whispered. I think I was called here. Jonas stepped toward her, voice steady. Then you found what they buried. No, she said, slipping her hand back into his. We did. And above them, the temple's ceiling reassembled itself in light, a great star flower blooming in the air, one petal at a time. Not to close them in, but to protect what had awakened. And for the first time since Elystra began measuring silence as order, a space meant for feeling opened its arms again, not to archive emotion, but to welcome it home. The temple was no longer sleeping. Every wall hummed with photonic memory. Every step echoed with awareness, not artificial but ancestral. It wasn't just a building, it was a witness. And now, with Serai's presence, it had chosen to remember again. The ceiling shimmered above them, alive with pulsing sigils, not symbols of control like those in the palace, but constellations of connection, emotion, union, truth. The kind of truths Elystra had been built to forget. Serai stood at the pedestal, the glow in her skin no longer flickering in fear but flowing with a purpose even she didn't fully understand. The echo of the ancient voice still rang in her bones, the most dangerous thing is to forget how to love. She turned toward Jonas, who stood just behind her, watching as if he knew she was crossing some invisible threshold. They won't let this survive, she said. Then we show them, he replied. She stared into the air above the pedestal. The interface responded, no code, no command, just intention. The light responded to her body the way music responds to breath. And then, like peeling back an ancient veil, the temple showed her the truth. It was still connected to the capital grid. Not in the official registers, but in the quantum residue that the council had failed to purge completely. It was enough. Help me, she whispered, and Jonas stepped beside her without hesitation. Together, they placed their palms on the interface. Bioluminescence wrapped around their fingers, spiraling together like strands of DNA, Elystra and human, logic and soul, program, and passion. The temple surged. And across the city above, in lecture halls, in state rooms, in the very chamber of the council, screens flickered. Black. Then light. Not static. Not noise. Serai. She stood tall, her skin glowing with colors forbidden, her eyes steady, her voice like rain returning to a desert. This message is not an act of defiance, she began. It is an act of remembrance. She paused, letting the silence settle into the bones of her people. We have not always lived this way. We were not born to be hollow. The light beneath our skin was not meant to be measured. It was meant to be shared. In the council chamber, mirrored faces leaned forward, the only movement they'd shown in centuries. I have felt something, she continued. Something not encoded. Not approved. Something true. And I will not surrender it. She lifted her hand, and Jonas stepped into frame beside her. I was not alone. The signal rippled. Across Elystra, implants flickered. Regulatory systems trembled as millions of neural interfaces received something they had never processed, unfiltered emotion, directly transmitted. Some collapsed. Some cried. Some simply stood, still and glowing, not from programming, but from themselves. In the broadcast chamber, the council surged to act, but too late. The signal was already alive. And for the first time in 1,000 years, Elystra's sky changed. Not the sky above, but the one within its people. Silence returned, but not the sterile, suffocating silence of before. This was different. It was the stillness of something pausing to feel. After the broadcast, Elystra didn't erupt. It didn't burn or collapse. Instead, it listened. In towers once devoted to logic, counselors sat frozen, the mirrored glass on their faces beginning to flicker, not with data, but with light. Not regulated. Not uniform. Just human. In the plazas, people emerged from their dwellings, staring at one another not as units in perfect synchrony, but as individuals unsure, unmasked, blinking in the flood of something forgotten. A woman reached out and touched her child's hand, and gasped when her own skin shimmered violet. A scholar in a remote observatory laughed without meaning to, and the entire dome pulsed gold around him. Some screamed. Some wept. Most just stood there, as if their bodies had remembered how to breathe again, not by code, but by choice. In the temple below, Serai sat on the floor, her knees tucked under her, staring at her glowing hands. She had not been recalibrated. She had not been punished. She had not even been chased. The system had frozen, not in power, but in uncertainty. They don't know what to do with me, she said softly. Jonas sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, heartbeat steady. Good. She turned. That doesn't worry you? He smiled. It means they are not in control anymore. That means you are. She looked back at her hands, watching the light swirl beneath her skin. It changed as her thoughts changed, flickering blue when she felt sorrow, amber when she remembered her sister, green when Jonas shifted slightly closer. I don't know what happens next. Neither do I, he said. But maybe, that's the point. She rested her head on his shoulder, no longer afraid of what it meant. Her body didn't glow violently anymore. It just existed. Open. Real. Responding not to fear, not to protocol, but to presence. Above them, Elystra was still. But not because it was controlled. Because it was waiting. Waiting to choose. Waiting to become. And for the first time in 1,000 years, its people, glowing, trembling, unfinished, had something no implant could generate, no system could code. Hope. 3 months later. In a city that once forbade touch, a public square glowed with couples holding hands, their skin pulsing in synchronized patterns. Serai and Jonas stood on a balcony above, watching. I was sent a toy, she said, teasing. He grinned. And got a whole human instead. You brought me back to life, she whispered. He took her glowing hand. You taught me how to live. And below, Elystra pulsed, not with machinery, not with silence, but with the unstoppable light of love rediscovered.